Hello, Avram.
Hi, Gershom. How are you doing?
I'm fine. This is Gershom Gorenberg, speaking in Jerusalem. I'm the author of The Accidental Empire and the correspondent in Jerusalem for the American Prospect magazine. And I'm speaking with an old friend, Avraham Burg, a recovering politician and the author of a new book. And Avram, where are you?
I have no idea, Gershom, to tell you the truth, okay? In the last 10 days or so, I've been to Israel, Milan, New York, Munich, and Washington, now back to New York. So I'm somewhere between Shamayim Va'aretz, between heaven and earth, okay?
In other words, you're on a book tour.
It's a book tour and a speaking engagement, and yes, it's about that. Not only I launched physically the book, both in English and Italian in the last 3 or 4 weeks, but it's about promoting the ideas that I wrote about, and I try to share them with as many people possible.
Okay, so Avram, I will just explain to the audience that you are the former Speaker of the Knesset, that you've left politics, and that you wrote a book which, at least in Hebrew, was called something which would translate as Defeating Hitler, which has an entirely different sound, I think, than what the book is actually about. So maybe you want to tell a little bit more about, first of all, what did you call this book in English?
Yeah, Defeating Hitler, Lenatzeach et Hitler, is an Hebrew name, which sounds okay in Hebrew, but when you translate it into English, it sounds out of the sound like a kind of a military maneuver. I mean, I go left hand, you go right hand, let's defeat the guy, okay? And it's not about that. It's about actually the sentence Pelgrim Macmillan, in a very creative way, took from the book and made the whole phrase the name of the book, which is "The Holocaust is over, we must rise from its ashes." And the argument is, after describing the omnipresence of the Holocaust in our life, politically, culturally, psychologically, socially, individually, you name it, at every walk of life in Israel, I argue that it's about time for us Israelis and for us Jews and maybe for us the Western world in general to move slowly but surely from trauma to trust, from being totally consumed and obsessed and engulfed by the Holocaust memories and deeds, into a different realm, which is a realm in which we trust much more ourselves, our neighborhood, and the world at large.
So I want you to look, what's been called the Shoah business, the Holocaust business, it has become a very major part of as you said, of Israeli life, of Jewish life, and beyond that. I mean, there's Holocaust museums all over the world. In recent years, Jewish groups have made a great point of trying to increase the commemoration of the Holocaust. What you're saying sounds somewhat heretical in that context. So what's wrong with Shoah business?
You know, when you say Shoah business, you, in a way, and I know you too well in order to believe that this is what you mean, you cheapen the whole thing, okay? But this cheap Shoah, so to say, cheap Holocaust, is actually what is happening to us. The fact that we use it all over the place, politically, every politician is using it. In the football court, soccer courts and stadium, you hear it time and again. When you evict the house from the controversial house in Hebron, the settlers are calling the policemen and the military and the soldiers, they call them Nazis. When you have a homosexuals and lesbian pride parade in Jerusalem, so the ultra-Orthodox demonstrators are calling them and the policemen Nazis. So it's all over the place. And I say something so traumatic and on the other hand so sacred and so important and should become much higher than the daily usage, I will say even the daily exploitation of it. So the first thing is to remove the Holocaust from the daily overusage by so many cynical or insensitive people. The second element is much deeper. Someday, soon, in our lifetime or in the lifetime of our children, we shall live at the first day in which there will be no living witness around us, because they naturally will pass away after 120 years of living amongst us. And the question is, how will look the first day like that of our children? Will that be a cloning, a cut-paste of the previous history, and say to the kids, listen, whatever traumas we went through, whatever traumatic experience which molded our psyche, we want you to go through it as well? Or do we go to tell them, listen, you're the first generation to live in a situation in which the Holocaust is not an experience anymore, but a memory, and you have to remember differently than the living witnesses. And what I try to do is to put the first, or one of among the first building blocks for this new structure.
Okay, so look, the fact of the matter is that even today, when we speak about the Holocaust, which ended 63 years ago, it's already a passed-on memory for most of us. You and I were both born after the Holocaust. Most of the people who are going to be watching this conversation were born after the Holocaust, maybe a generation or two after the Holocaust. And
right.
It seems that the process of passing it on as a trauma has already taken place. So, maybe you should start from there. What is you said that this is so much part of Israeli and of Jewish life. Why? What's the impulse to pass it on as a trauma?
I would like to separate between emotional reactions and national tools or governmental tools with your permission, or collective tools with your permission. Whether it is the individuals are living amongst us, my parents, my father who passed away 9 years ago and ran away from Berlin at the very last moment, September 39, or neighbors or family, friends, or just somebody I know or heard about, as long as they are living among us, this trauma is so big and so huge, and it leaves its imprint on each and every one of us. I mean, you cannot evade it. When something like this happens to an individual, it's awful, but then you look around and you say it's happened to the collective, it's 10 times so, or 100 times so. And I take it that you, as well as I, having some friends, usually female or women friends, who were abused or raped or whatever, not all of them are able to go out of this personal horror and the personal abuse or rape or trauma. And when I look around, I say to myself, well, maybe there are some collectives, maybe there are some nations, maybe there are some people who cannot go out of the trauma. But in order to go out of this trauma, we must let the nature do its job, and we should do something else. Nature, which means as long as people talk about it, as long as people remember it, let's respect it, let's even sanctify it. But the state, as the organ who organizes our life, cannot supply the next generation copied trauma, which means I'm so much against, for example, the annual journey of kids before the military service. And it's very important that you're 16 and 17, your blood is boiling, and they take you to Auschwitz and to the other concentration and death camps, and all of a sudden you become a kind of a different soldier. All of a sudden you have a feeling that the Holocaust is the raison d'être, is the reason of being of the State of Israel, which is not and should not be.
I just want to stop you here and to fill in for a second a bit of background, which we're both aware of, but others may not be, which is that it has become
Please help me there.
It has become increasingly a almost universal experience of Israeli high school students. There's this huge project whereby Israeli high school students are sent, usually in 12th grade, for a week of touring Poland, in which they visit key sites in which the Holocaust took place. And, of course, this is an incredibly intense experience for young people, and very formative experience, and perhaps also a very controversial one, because in a country where resources for education have been too meager, obviously this is a huge expense. So this is the question we're talking about. It's also, I think, something which has taken place on a smaller scale, but there are certainly also tours like this, See the Holocaust tours, that have been set up for Jewish young people from other parts of the world.
I have no problem when you're grown up, when you're mature, more experienced, and you have enough of emotional and intellectual skills to absorb it, it's fine with me to go over there. But when you're so young, it's a manipulation. It's a manipulation of the nation over the soul of the individual, and this is something I do not want to say. I do not want to see, and therefore when I told you earlier that I make a distinction between the individual and even the group's memories and the state's actions, this is exactly the watershed.
So why does the state want to do this? I mean, in other words, this is a national project, as you said. I mean, it's set up through the education ministry. It's set up through the schools. Every high school is doing this. It's a huge project. Why in your understand? And by the way, I'd like to give a little bit of historical background there. People who look back talk about the fact that in the early years of the State of Israel, basically between even before independence, from the Holocaust until the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, that Israelis didn't talk about the Holocaust. They suppressed it. They didn't get their feelings out in the open. And today, when we're actually much further away, when the survivors are passing from this world, there's this immense project of passing it on. How do you understand that?
Let's again make a separation. I write a lot about the fact that it takes years for a traumatized, abused individual or collective to open up. Sometimes you suppress it. You must do it in order to come back immediately or as soon as possible to normal life, because otherwise you're just consumed by this awful experience and you can never go back to life. So it makes sense that it takes, I don't know what, decades even, for the people to come back. But once they talk about it, you can never stop them, and it's fine with me as well. I mean, that's natural. I only ask myself about not just about yesterday and our parents' experience and the first generation, even second generation experience. I'm asking myself about what do I have to tell to my children? What do I have to tell the next generation? How to move onwards rather than just to dig in deeper and deeper and deeper into this experience. Why the state is doing it? It's a very good question. I think it started just as an experience and it's simply catch. But I talked to one of the interviews I did during the writing of this book and my previous book, which I wrote 5 years ago. One of the teachers, a very sensitive educator, told me Auschwitz is maybe the last place in which you can still educate an Israeli.
What does that mean? I don't understand that.
You know, when you look around to all the other Israeli challenges, wars and no peace, an economic growing gap between have and have not, and so many internal challenges, and sometimes even in certain places, in the eyes of certain beholders, the social integrity and the social solidarity is diminishing, and maybe even more than this. The only place in which you can still install and you can talk about and give the students the feeling we are one and we have a destiny is in front of the memory of the common enemy, which is the arch evil, the Nazis and anti-Semites, etc., etc. One of my arguments is that it is impossible, inconceivable for us to continue the imagined external enemy just in order to preserve the internal integrity. And the number one question that I think our generation is facing is a very simple one, assuming that very soon we shall have peace in the region, very soon, maybe politically, maybe historically, a couple of years or a couple of dozens of years. Historically, it's a short period. And then the entire Jewish people will live in the democratic hemisphere. The entire Jewish people, for the first time in its history, will live outside of the immediate threat for its life. And then all of a sudden the question will be, can the Jewish people survive without an external enemy? Which means, give me a war, give me a disaster, give me a pogrom, I know what to do. Give me peace, give me tranquility, give me good time, and I'm lost because I don't have enough of internal magnets or cohesive forces to keep me as such. And therefore I have a suspicion that so many of those captains of the state or captains of the educational system who send the kids over know about the internal hollowness and try to create an external definition as if the enemy is still there, let's restore it.
Okay, I want to move this to a wider sphere because I remember that many years ago, before I left the United States, a very dedicated Jewish educator who was involved in trying to teach young American Jews to remain Jewish, not to assimilate, told me that the only thing which moves the teenagers are the Holocaust and the State of Israel. And the way that the State of Israel was taught at the time was also besieged, facing enemies, and this was the message that was being passed on to Jews in order to keep them Jewish in American society. So it doesn't seem to me that this, and in the process of passing on that message and of making it so central, maybe this has also become a part of wider culture as well. So, I'd like you to address that. Is this just an Israeli issue? Are you just engaged in anthropology here if you're having this book appear in English, or is there an issue that goes beyond Israel, perhaps beyond Jews, in terms of how the Holocaust is remembered? Or maybe it should be remembered less, or at least less emotionally.
The Holocaust did not happen in a void. It happened by people to people. It happened in reality by real individuals to real individuals, by real collective to a real collective. It happened to us, and it happened by others. And therefore, you cannot say, listen, from the minute that the gates of Auschwitz were open, or the gates of the concentration camps were open and the places were liberated, it's the responsibility of the victims to remember and to commemorate the trauma alone. It's not our responsibility at all, not at all, it's not our responsibility alone, it's the entire world's responsibility. It is the responsibility of the victims, and it's the responsibility of the victimizers. In my book, I try to argue that for me, never again, which is used so many times on annual trips to Israel, in fundraising events, in political occurrences, that for me, never again is not just shallow, egocentric, never again for Jews, which means let's have the thickest walls around us, and let's have the deeper shelter to live in, and let's defend ourselves with the mightiest, most strong military army we've ever had in our life. For me, this is not that. For me, never again means never again to anybody, Jew or non-Jew alike, who lives somewhere around the world and who suffers today from a genocide, from a crime against humanity, from a crime against peace, from abuse, from whatever it is. And I should be there sometimes physically, and if I cannot physically, to raise the awareness of the indifferent world, because you know as well as I do that we had those who violated us, and we had us, and in between we had millions and millions of people who were simply indifferent. And therefore, my responsibility out of these death heaps and death camps and death centers in Europe is not just to say the Holocaust is mine and all the rest of the world, please do not interfere. I say, on the contrary, I don't have a monopoly over it. We do not have a monopoly over suffering. On the contrary, we had an awful experience, and there are others who suffer as well. Let's be there for them in such a way that nobody has been there for us so many years ago. And therefore, when you educate according to the shadow of the Holocaust, for me, you do not just educate, here are the Nazis who were the bad guys, and the collaborators who were bad guys, and the Jews who were good guys, and that's it. It is not only that. It's about the righteous among the nations, for example. Those individuals.
You need to explain that phrase.
There were thousands of people, many thousands of people, the entire nation of Denmark, many thousands or hundreds of people in Poland, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Germany itself. We also, Schindler's List, right? Individual who rescued Jews, risked their life against the governments of tyranny, against the regimes of the time, against the Secret Service and the SS and all of these frightening governmental instruments. And they simply did the most elementary humanistic thing. They saved life, not just life of Jews, but life of human beings. And those people are the miracles of the time. Those are the people who saved the sanity and the humanity of the Western world. So when we celebrate and we remember and commemorate the Holocaust, it's not just remembering the 6 million victims, it's remembering a wider spectrum as well.
I remember that when your book originally came out in Hebrew, the reaction was, to put it mildly, a controversy. The book was on the bestseller list, if I remember properly. At the same time, the media reaction was fierce and angry. There was an interview with you that was published in Haaretz, I believe, with Ari Shavit, Haaretz being usually a very liberal newspaper. And I'm not even sure whether I could call it an interview, because I remember reading it and saying the interviewer is speaking much more than the interviewee, and seemed incredibly upset with you. How do you understand that? You seem to have become a intellectual pariah when the book came out.
The very first days of the book and the interviews around it were not very simple and were not very comfortable, but since I fully and wholeheartedly believe in the message we're just talking about in the last half an hour or so, and whatever I wrote in my book, The Holocaust is Over, and we must rise from its ashes, I know it's going to come, and I said to myself, and I said to Yael, my wife, listen, if nobody will react, if the Israeli society's attitude will be simple indifference, and you know, Gershom, that every now and then we face this frustrating indifference in Israel. So I told myself and I told her, if this will be the reaction, the society is dead. The fact that there was such a hot discussion, such a very controversial polemic around it, told me that the society is very much alive. So yes, there were very many people who were very upset. It's very difficult for individuals and for groups and for congregations to depart from the old paradigms. We say the devil we know, and this is actually the devil we know. We know the devil of the Holocaust. And here comes somebody and says, hey, this devil is just a very diabolic devil, not even wearing Prada. It's just a bad thing to live within the obsession of the Holocaust only, without offering some kind of a light at the other side of this tunnel to the next generation. And many people did not even want to listen to the message. They simply were obsessed and very
busy
there friends that killing the messenger.
Were there friends who didn't want to speak to you?
No, personally it's not an issue. Of course not. I mean, collectively, there were these people and other people, and Ari Shavit, the reporter as well, who came to interview me, and all of a sudden became a rival and adversary, which is his professional ethics. It's not my problem. I'm here. I mean, the messenger, fortunately, is not yet dead and does not have any plans to do it very soon. And I continue to promote exactly this idea that humanity around the world is my responsibility.
I want to ask you one last thing about the book before moving on to something else. There's a section of the book where you write a great deal about your father, and
right.
To explain to viewers, your father, Avraham Burg, was, as you said, an immigrant to Israel from Germany. He probably served in the Israeli cabinet longer than anyone else has, and perhaps longer than anyone else ever will.
Years.
He represented the relatively small National Religious Party, and when you entered politics back in the 1980s as a protester against the First Lebanon War, you seemed to be the exact opposite of your father. You were Israeli born. You were, if I'm not mistaken, a former paratrooper in the Israeli army. You were the kind of Israeli that the tour guides take people to see and say, see, this is how we've created the new Jew in the state of Israel. And it seemed, if I look back at that you were pretty comfortable with that. You were not going to stay in the little religious ghetto of the National Religious Party. You were going to be part of general politics. You were presenting a very different image. And I'm not trying to be your psychologist, but it seemed to me reading the book that part of it was also aimed at a certain kind of reconciliation with your diaspora father. Suddenly a different attitude, maybe not suddenly, but certainly much, very strongly, a different attitude toward his experience. Is this... does this ring for you? I mean, were you, in a sense, rejecting the new Jew, the Israeli?
First, I'd love you to become a shrink. I mean, especially when it comes for free. Okay, there are some things there. Yes, I was for many, many years, I was an Israeli. I was an Israeli in the sense that I was born in Israel, I speak the language, despite the fact that you hear now a little bit of a very heavy Arnold Schwarzenegger German accent, okay? I'm an Israeli. And I love the place, and I function in the place, I struggle in the place and struggle for the place. And my father, no doubt, was born in a different place. And he was born a couple of world orders before me. He was born in 1909, which is actually before the First World War order. And he knew a different world, and he was quite an exilic or diasporic, had a diasporic mentality. Even though we did not need any reconciliation because we were very, very, very good friends all during our life. And the only place in which we had a very serious disagreement, and it was a very contained one because we knew it is there, that he represented, as you said, the National Religious Party and believed that the State of Israel has a religious dimension or a messianic importance. It is the dawn of our redemption. And I totally disagree with it, and I told him time and again. He never said I'm wrong. He just said that's the way I feel, and you have to give me the credit of having this kind of a life story. I told him, Daddy, every time the Jewish politics merged with Jewish messianism, it ended up with a catastrophe. So why do you want to repeat it? And he said, you're wrong, but I've seen hell. So for me, the state is a kind of a redemption. During the years, when the more I thought about it and the more I tried to understand what is missing from my personal equations and our collective equations, I realized that, every morning when I shave my face, I shave a little bit more of my father, so to say. He was looking at me from the mirror. Yes, I'm missing the European dimension of his life. And what I try to do is to try to restore part of my Jewish European, how do you say Europeanism? European is...
Europeanness.
I don't even know how to say Europeanness. Okay? I try to restore it, to have this kind of dialogue. I, for many years, had actually just an Israeli and American Jewish conversation, and I need a third dimension, which is European discourse, and this is what I try to do. So the book, part of it is something like 1/3 of it is a conversation with the memories that I've had of my father and my late mother, which were different people than I am.
So to some extent what you're saying is that instead of looking, the classic Zionist story is Europe was a disaster. We were a minority there and they hated us and we're glad it's over with. And to some extent you're saying that something else has to be reclaimed from that experience. Or to put it differently, if you're going to go to Europe, it shouldn't just be to visit death camps.
Yeah, no doubt about it. What I argue in my book, and I did not develop it enough because it is not the main emphasis of the story, the main emphasis about us, is that Europe is not just the 6 years of the final solution, or the 4 years of the final solution, not even the 12 years of Hitler. Europe is more than a millennium, a century of cooperation with ups and downs, with pogroms and bloodshed, plus Maimonides and Spinoza and Mendelssohn and Freud and Marx. I mean, we had some up bits and some down bits in this relationship between Europe and us, and it's not something that just because happened what happened, we have to throw away 1,000 years of mutual enrichment for 6 years of abuse.
So, we've talked about Europe. I want to switch now to something about Israel. You spent several years in Israeli politics, and then you left it. You wanted to be the head of the Labour Party, which would have meant that you would have been its candidate for prime minister. And now that party is expected to collapse in the upcoming elections. It seems like the Labour Party may also be a historical memory. You'll tell your children that it once existed, or your grandchildren. Why did you?
Maybe I'll write a book about it.
Yeah, right. So why did you leave that party? Were you just somebody who was smart enough to get out of the market before it crashed? Why is the Labour Party, which is the founding party of Israel? How do you understand the fact? I have some thoughts about this too, but how do you understand the fact that this party is disappeared? Has Israel simply moved to the right? Has it become truly completely convinced of the theory that we're only united by our enemies? What do you think's happening here?
There are here actually two parts to your question. The first one is why I left, and the other one is why the Labour Party is dying. Why I left, because 5 years ago, it started earlier than this, 6.5 or 7 years ago, I all of a sudden realized that as much as I am well equipped to survive the Israeli politics, Israel, from the point of view I've had at the time, and I was the Speaker of the House, I was highly elected in each and every primaries of the Labour Party, so I had a kind of a top-of-the-hill point of view. But from this high top-of-the-hill point of view, I realized that Israel, in the last political generation, became a very efficient kingdom, but with no prophecy, which means there is no direction, there is no polar star, there is no compass, there is no orientation. Where do we take it? And I personally cannot live in a political situation in which I have no direction. And one of the reasons that I withdrew and I retired from Israeli politics is to sit down and think for myself. What do I think? Where it goes? Where it's coming from? What should be challenged? What are the obstacles and what are the solutions? And the way I think for many years, the way I think through writing. I think through my keyboard, so to say. So I wrote the first book, which is God is Back, is about the religious dimension of the 21st century Israel and the world. And the second one is about the omnipresence of the Holocaust in our life and ways to go out of it. And I keep writing about issues that I believe are feeding the traumas and the alternatives to the current and contemporary Israeli situation. So this is my very personal reason. I didn't want to be in politics just for the sake of being in politics. I wanted to do something of an impact, and at the time I thought it's possible to do within the political system. Now I do it from outside, and do it by writing and supporting others who are running. As for the labor, it's a very, very long and sad story, but at least in the current home stretch, so to say, there are two issues that the Israeli society is facing. The first one is the entire story of the sad relations between us and the Palestinians, and the other is the economic situation, which is as worse as here, which is looking for some alternatives, understanding the neoconservative Adam Smith ultra-liberal economy is awful,
liberal in the European sense of free market.
Yeah, that's right.
Not in the American sense.
Let's go without falling into the trap of terminology. Is the kind of the neoconservative last couple of years capitalist economy that they have had in America. The Labour Party actually does not have any peace plan anymore. Ehud Barak personally navigated the party right to some of the right-wing parties. And as for the economic things, there is no alternative. There is no counter arch capitalism coming from the Labour Party. On the contrary, some of its leaders and the number one leader are living a kind of a very affluent capitalist life that cannot radiate and broadcast to the people. We are offering you an alternative of a much more responsible economy of solidarity and fraternity. And therefore, because of these two reasons, the Labour is perceived as, for now, as a kind of a bankrupt.
I would just suggest here that another factor which is going on here is that Labour, for practical purposes, was the founding party of Israel. I'm not sure if the party ever quite adjusted to the fact that it had already founded the state and now had to find a purpose after that.
I don't disagree.
It's been slowly winding down since then, but of course that leaves us with a race which is really between a party which is slightly getting over its right-wing inclinations, Kadima, and a very right-wing party under Netanyahu, a party which has almost been taken over by the extreme right, according to the primary results.
What do you mean almost?
Okay, I'll strike that word from the record. So, you have anybody left to vote for?
I'll vote for the New Left Party, which I'm very much in support, because I believe there you find the purity of the idea. There you find people who did not really compromise in front of the arrogant Bush-Sharon unilateralism and the kind of escapism of building a high wall that you don't see the situation behind it. Those are people who try to dry the ocean of hatred around us by dialogue, by conversation, by humanity, by trying to give it a chance to us and to our partners. I do believe that this is actually the future of Israel. And in the confrontation, or in the confrontation between right-wing messianic fundamentalism and left-wing alternative for peace and humanity, I go for the left.
So we could have a situation where in January, we will have a situation that in January, Barack Obama becomes president of the United States, and a few weeks after that, the right, at least according to the polls, is likely to take power in Israel.
Poor Hillary Clinton.
And what is supporting Israel? I mean, I have my answers to this, but what about the person who's saying they're supporting Israel by sticking up for the Israeli for the Israeli government in this situation, assuming that Hillary has the courage to publicly disagree?
You mean support from the outside?
Right. You're at least according to the area code, you're talking to me from New York, as far as I can figure out. So, what do you want to see happen from there? I have a problem, a very personal problem. I find it very difficult to talk to people who's got no backbone. I mean, people say, never mind what I think, right or wrong, the Israeli Prime Minister, they're not my kind of a partner. If you're a right-winger, support the right wing. If you're a left-winger, support the left. If you want peace, go for it regardless of what is the situation. And I said the follows: if there will be a situation like you described, that Benjamin Netanyahu and the extreme right will establish the democratically elected government of Israel, and the world will come and tell it, European and American alike, listen, whatever kind of politics you have, which is the annexation of the West Bank, more settlements, support of the settlers and confinement to the Palestinians, lack of humanistic attitude and approach to Gaza and some other places, in Hebron included, we think it is bad for the region, we think it's bad for Israel, and we think it's bad for the world entirely. And they will put a pressure on Israel to unlock the horns between us and the Palestinians. I would say I fully agree. I fully agree because, yes, sometimes the two sides are playing a kind of childish game, and we need the responsible, mature person to come and say, hey, kids, pay attention because, you're going to ruin the peace of the world. And therefore, I do believe that the kind of introduction, dialogue that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton will reintroduce to the region will do the pressure and will do the work. If Benjamin Netanyahu will listen to it and will respond to it, I'll be the happiest person around, despite the fact that I did not support him. And if he will not, the Israeli opposition, which will be our movement and some others, will just do our utmost that politically to offer an alternative to the Israelis, which is less living on our sword and much more living for our hope. Or, to get back to where we started this from, perhaps less living in the sense that we're still in the Warsaw Ghetto.
No doubt about it.
Which is clearly
That's
also part of
Netanyahu represents the Masada syndrome. And the Masada syndrome, which is, it's a beautiful place in which Jews committed suicide, stands totally against my very basic understanding of what Judaism is all about and what Israel should be about. Israel is not a Masada syndrome. Israel is not about committing suicide. Israel is not about, and Judaism is not about sanctifying those who commit suicide just for the sake of suicide. Israel is about something else, and this something else is very much of, I believe, what my friends and I represent for so many years, even when we are minority, what the majority of the Israelis are feeling like should be the arrangement, and what I believe should be the policy of the world, both in Washington and in Europe.
All right. Thank you very much, Avram. This is Gershom.
Pleasure. Toda rabba, Gershom.
Thank you, Avram. Good night.
Bye.